Welcome to Lansing Online News Radio, LCC Radio, WLNZ 89.7 here in Lansing, Michigan. This is Bonnie Buckaroo, Lansing Online News, soon to be joined by my cohort, Bill Castanier, and nice sort of fall, drizzly kind of evening here. We're starting to see the beginnings of some real fall weather.
It's cold.
It is cold.
It was cold over the weekend one day, too. Very cold.
But it's going to be up to 70 by Wednesday.
That's Indian summer. I just bought a book on the history and culture of Indian summer.
Oh, well,
It's a pretty bizarre little book.
Well, if we have enough global warming, it'll last all year. So.
Yeah.
I guess we could have an El Nino this year, which would make us less snow but warmer temps. That would.
Well, we had no snow last year.
I know. Our water table is down so far. I have no pond anymore. Normally, by this time of the year, I have my pond back. So I worry about the deer that you rely on it for water. I don't know where they're going anymore.
You know, it's like that all over.
Is it?
Yeah, I mean, the Great Lakes are down to 1964 levels, which was the lowest ever in recordable history, and I think it's going to pass it. It should pass it. I mean, there's nothing to turn it around.
At the same time, the ocean levels are rising, and the people in Tuvalu and the Maldives are worried that one of these days, pretty quickly, they're much more quickly than they had anticipated, they're going to have to leave. Not that any of these questions will be raised in the presidential debate tomorrow evening. It seems we've done a really good job of avoiding climate change altogether.
Absolutely. No discussion of really serious issues.
No. You know, there's this assumption that only tax policy and foreign policy matter, and that the obsessions of the Beltway in Washington are the same for the broader country at large. But women, I think, have felt that their issues have been given short shrift. There was one brief exchange last week in the vice presidential debate on abortion, but that really they've not received the attention they deserve. Climate change certainly hasn't. There are just a host of issues. I'd like to see, legalization of marijuana and the change in the drug war on the agenda as well, but I fear we never will.
We've got a moderator tomorrow night, a woman, so maybe it behooves her to ask those questions.
She doesn't get to ask any.
No, I know.
In fact, that's the big debate right now, is that Candy Crowley has been told that she is to be no more than really a person who says, "You're next." That's supposed to be. And now, if she is smart, however, and I do believe that Candy is, and she's one of the most astute people around, I think she might just decide to ignore those rules like the candidates do.
I was going to say, why wouldn't she? What's going to happen bad to her?
I know.
Nothing. We're not going to ask you again?
Yeah, they're not going to ask you anyhow.
Shucks.
Yeah, too bad. No, this is her big chance. I think this is going to be quite interesting. Yeah, I can't wait. And I have enjoyed, by the way, I think SNL has found its stride again.
Oh, they were good.
They were very good. Did you enjoy
Yep, both of them.
Yes.
They were really good.
I loved it. I also loved did you see the little sequence that they did with the iPod, with the new iPhone users? And then they had the 3 peasant workers from Foxconn on. I love that one. They were asking, and is there any product that the United States manufactures that you Chinese workers are upset with? And they look and pondered, do you make products? And then the one guy says, is diabetes a product? So that was pretty good. Speaking of television, we should introduce our first guest. We're already venturing into TV territory. Mike Hughes has Mike Hughes TV, and he has the former columnist at the Lansing State Journal.
Still Pearson State Journal. Still Pearson State Journal, and a dozen other papers.
And is that how it works?
Big papers like Cincinnati, little papers like Oshkosh, Wisconsin.
Wisconsin.
Okay, so it's in all those. But speaking of the debates, first of all, Candy Crowley tomorrow night will be the first woman to moderate a debate, presidential debate, in 20 years. First time in 20 years.
Can we name the other person?
Yeah, Carol Simpson.
Carol Simpson, who is not happy.
Who was also the first African American narrator when she hosted. So she doubled. She was one. She was one of the first African Americans and the first woman to moderate, and almost became the last woman to moderate until Candy Crowley came up later on. Yeah, as solo moderator. Now, obviously, Bernard Shaw had been a moderator previously.
Diane Sawyer was on with him at one point. Someone that
But I'll tell you, first of all, the moderators. I mean, I, like many people, and apparently not everyone agrees with this, very disappointed in Jim Lehrer the first time. I thought he just
extremely disappointed.
He just lost control instantly. His first question was a non-question, and from then on it was gone. I actually liked Martha Raditz's work on the second one.
Yeah.
Candy Crowley is really kind of handcuffed, but here's the interesting thing about that debate. They set up a contract. Republicans and the Democrats signed it for what this debate was going to be. But there's not necessarily any proof that Candy Crowley knew about that.
Well, in fact, it's quite clear she didn't.
She didn't, yeah. So she didn't realize. Mrs. Really, supposedly, it gives her it almost says this woman will be seen and not heard. That's almost what it says, because they said the moderator should do nothing but yes sir, yes sir, yes sir, and answer the questions. You know she's not going to do that because you know she's Candy Crowley. You know that people have got to, on these debates, when both people obfuscate, got to say, oh, wait a second, what about this? Wait a second. That's what the moderator's got to do. That's what Jim Laird didn't do. That's what Martha Raddatz occasionally did. Yeah. And we got to hope Candy Crowley does it. It's going to be interesting, though. It's going to be a town hall style debate. In other words, we can.
Who do you think that favors?
It favored Clinton in the Clinton George H.W. Bush debate because Clinton was more able to work with the given flow. I would have said ordinarily would favor Obama because Romney is stiffer. However, you can see that he got it just as loose as a goose last time. Yeah. See, a town hall debate you've got to be fairly loose with. You cannot be stiff. You can't constantly go into your dogma because you never know what they're going to ask. But last time, Romney was the looser of the two people, which surprised everybody.
Obama's kind of aloof. He's not going to be able to do what Clinton did, which was to feel their pain immediately. Yeah. I mean, he doesn't do that very well.
He's got to do that this time. Yeah, that is crucial. So it seems obvious that he's been told you've got to be yourself now. Quit being presidential. Start being Barack Obama. He probably will do that. It's safe to say that he'll be somewhere between Barack Obama in the first debate and Joe Biden last time. And everybody in the world is somewhere between those extremes. Yeah.
Let's let John weigh in.
Yes, I want to hear from John Lindstrom. John Lindstrom, publisher of Gongwer. Yes, tell us.
I think in the format tomorrow that most people expect that President Obama has the advantage. I've talked with a number of Republicans who are candidly nervous about Governor Romney.
Really?
In part because they're worried because they're afraid that he might not show any connection, any touch with the general public who'll be answering the questions. And if you're going to have a flub of a major type, you can have it in any circumstance, but that's the one that you worry the most about. When you make a flub to a regular person as opposed to a reporter who's moderating, it can have bigger impact. So
and flub isn't what we usually think of. We usually think of a flub as some huge mistake or so forth. But a flub is when someone says, "What are you going to cut the money from?" and you suddenly say Big Bird and Sesame Street. I mean, the fact is that Sesame Street and Big Bird are wildly popular, and it's just the wrong one to name.
And you can if you monitor social media, you can see what makes people nervous about things. All of a sudden, last week, Republicans started posting on Twitter and Facebook all kinds of things like the only big bird we should be worried about is a bald eagle, F-16s, and things like that.
You follow more people on Twitter than I do.
So that's the sort of thing that you can tell is having a problem. A flub can also be something completely nonverbal.
Yeah.
The famous example is nobody who walks out in a debate now is wearing a wristwatch.
Yeah.
Because of what President George H.W. Bush did during one of the debates when he took a look at his watch and did it, and everyone saw it. And there was this whole thing about, what are you looking at your clock for? You're doing a debate and you're talking to the American people. So those are the kinds of things that people are very. Debates can usually hurt you more than help you, although they can help you. There's a series of
certainly help.
There's a debate on debates within the professional and academic community, but we certainly have seen that Governor Romney got helped by the debate 2 weeks ago, and that the president's been helped somewhat by Vice President Biden's performance last week. So.
And when people get too worried about making a flub, they make the biggest flub of all, which is to seem too listless.
Right. You can't be a deer in the headlights.
Yeah, the people who've been hurt by simply not being active enough were Dukakis in his first debate, and Obama in his first debate, and as we said, George H.W. Bush against Clinton.
And Gore.
And Gore, definitely. You've got to not be so wary of flubbing that you make the biggest flub of all, which is just to seem like you're not there.
The biggest problem, I think, for Romney is that he does not have the common touch. When he turned to to Governor Perry and challenged him to a $10,000 bet. Because for him, that's the same as saying, let's put 5 on that. I mean, that's the kind of thing that he just comes from a realm where he doesn't understand the parameters of the average person's economic life. And he's in danger of making that kind of comment, not because he hasn't been well prepped, but just because of his worldview.
It was interesting today. There was a review of an interview with the author of a book called Plutocrats, which is dealing with the super rich. And I've been fortunate in my life to know a number of people who've been very, very successful, and quite a number of them came from very poor circumstances. And they're living a good life, but they also recognize where they were and what people go through. There's other people I've known who forgot.
Or who came from privilege to begin with.
In my case, I don't really know anybody who came from that much privilege that they would have forgotten. But
damn it, you.
But there are clearly people that they do forget. And it's not. I'm not trying to be critical about it. I mean, it's just you know the circumstances
right.
And so it's hard sometimes for people to understand that there are things different than that. I mean, I knew a fellow who talked about how nobody can live in New York City who doesn't make at least $250,000 a year. And I thought, well, my sister does, and she doesn't make anywhere near that much money. But I mean, he just didn't really connect. I mean, to him, this was having lunch once a week at 21 was what you did, and everyone does that, and so they must, because he couldn't get a table. So
I was at a cocktail party years ago at the Chicago Mercantile Exchange with a fairly affluent crowd, and I had a man sidle up to me, and he said, whispered in my ear, and he said, "You grew up poor, didn't you?" And I thought, "Whoa!" And I said, "Wow!" I said, "I guess it shows more than you thought, than I thought." And I said, "How did I get caught out?" He said, "You have your thumbs inside your coffee cup because you grew up in a place where they didn't always have handles." And I thought, you're absolutely right. But what's interesting is that he would notice.
Yeah.
Because there is almost like a secret handshake in that sense. They're always on the alert for people who might have snuck in under the tent that may not belong in that place. It's interesting.
And Mitt Romney has learned all the things to say to sound personal. So when he goes into versions of his stump speech, even in debate, he'll say, as an engineer from so-and-so said, as a farmer from so-and-so said, he'll give some name of some town and so forth. You notice now the auto worker is not from Michigan, he's from Toledo. Because he's going for the Ohio vote, not the Michigan vote. As an auto worker from Toledo told me. So that works so, but since we all know that sounds pretty contrived, you're just saying a thing in a place. If you say that too much in a debate, you're not really relating to real people.
But John, do you find from your audience in the Montgomery report that people who are on one side of the political spectrum accept their candidate in a way that people on the other side don't? I mean, it's almost like George Bush's words grated on me after a while. I even had difficulty listening to his voice without it getting under my skin.
Well, I think that the extremes that are being pushed on both sides are true under any circumstances, and I think that if you're a Democrat on the left, it wouldn't matter who the Republican was, you wouldn't stand them, and if you're a Republican leaning right, you would feel the same way about the Democrat. There's still a great, I think most people are still sort of center, left, center, right, however you go, but that center is the preeminent adjective, and are willing to give somebody the benefit of the doubt. The fact that the Governor Romney may have 4 or 5 houses is not in and of itself a bad thing, because most people would like to be able to have 4 or 5 houses.
Really? I wouldn't want 4 or 5 houses.
Too many toilets to fix.
Yeah,
I wouldn't have to fix them. That's right.
Some of us are women and think about cleaning them.
Well, but I mean, the point of the matter is, most people, if you ask most people, would you like to be rich? They say, sure, I'd like to be rich. Who wouldn't want to be rich? Now, wealth has different meanings to different people, but I think that one of the things that we have a problem with now in politics is, in general, and it's certainly clear at the national level, and it's clear also getting now down to the local levels, is that we no longer see each other as part of the same team. We have differences. People are now seeing each other as honest to God enemies.
Well, we have different tribes then, definitely.
And that has become a very big problem in our common discourse in this country, and it's one of the reasons why we have so much trouble making even basic decisions.
And you remember when you're trying to round up a majority, if you're a Democrat, you're trying to round up, you go to the moderate Republicans. You would go to Packwood and Morris and Javits and so forth. If you were a Republican, you'd get the moderate Democrats, particularly from the South. That's how you'd do it. And that's how you would form these different majorities. Isn't it incredible that the Obamacare vote passed entirely on party lines? Not a single Republican voted for it. That's just so different from a little while ago, because I remember when you would constantly get these people near the middle crossing back and forth. And I remember when Michigan was the most known for moderate Republicans.
We don't have any Dixiecrats, and they don't have any moderate Republicans.
So
both parties have purged.
Yeah, they purged Lugar even. Yeah,
we are all of an age where, if you go back and you look at the Greatest Generation, what may have made it the Greatest Generation was that people understood, hey, we got some big problems here. We got a depression we got to figure out. We got a war we got to win. And it doesn't matter if you're a Democrat or Republican. We got to figure this thing out together. There are times when I begin to wonder if the period of time that we moved from basically the end of Second World War to the mid 1980s was an unusual period in American history. I mean, the Social Security Act passed by one vote. So, that kind of partisanship on major issues is not unknown in American history. One of the things that happened is, you would go to the moderates, but more of what you tried to do is you tried to find the areas where people could agree on.
Yeah.
And you take the issues you couldn't agree on, you put those aside. And you'd say, okay, we need to reach agreement on education policy. So you piece together an agreement on the things that people could agree on, and you maybe even get touches on some of the big issues. Now it's an all or nothing package, and that makes it very, very difficult for either side to get something through. They have to rely on their own side, and that means, Democrats have told me this, Republicans have told me this. When you can only rely on your own side, you got to talk to the crazies, and you got to go to the crazies, and you got to give the crazies what they want. And it doesn't matter the Democratic crazies or the Republican crazies, but that's what you end up having to do.
This is LCC Radio, WLNZ 89.7 here in Lansing, Michigan. I would tend to disagree about one thing, though, John. I think we wax eloquent all the time about the Greatest Generation after World War II, but it was a white male-dominated society where women and minorities didn't have any real rights. They had to fight like crazy to try in the 60s to be able to, in the 50s and 60s through the civil rights movement and the women's liberation.
Well, I'm not going to suggest it was perfect. By no means was it perfect.
Right.
But you were still able to get a lot of things through, a lot of decisions through, and a lot of progress economically, in terms of our education system, in terms of our transportation systems, all kinds of things. You were able to get decisions made, and people were able to come together on those things. Obviously, there were big differences, and those differences began to wear away at that unified sense and help tear it down eventually. But civil rights probably being the biggest one.
Lefty that I am, though, I'm concerned that it was the compromises that someone like Bill Clinton made that really allowed for the erosion that's leading to many of our problems now. He was the one that colluded in getting rid of Glass-Steagall and a lot of the welfare safety net and the redistribution of wealth that's upward. Bill Clinton, in some ways, because of his commitment to free trade globally, ended up decimating the industrial base here in the Midwest. And it's that kind of compromise that I don't see as a worthwhile thing. I think that what you need is the old fighter FDR who says, let's go to the mat and go to the left. That's my idea.
We've really suffered by the fighters lately, and it went both ways.
It hasn't gone both ways. Well, I'd say the crazies are pretty well located.
Oh, okay. That's where the majority of crazies are. Yeah. But as far as the fighters are concerned, it was when the Republican House said, we're not going to agree with you on anything. We're going to make the country look bad during the Obama administration. That was the one thing. And then, as some people have said, it was when the Obama administration really was not very skillful at trying to get at least part of the Republicans out.
I don't think in the Tea Party era there was anybody to be had.
Yeah. It is really a shame when we see several people defeated in the primary because their fault was they sometimes agreed with the president.
Exactly.
That is terrible. Particularly Lugar, who was around there forever, and he was one of the top people in foreign policy, and he was out strictly because the guy agreed with the president.
What are you seeing here in Michigan? Because we do have sort of one-party government here in the state of Michigan now. Will much of that change as a result of this election?
I don't anticipate that. I think that the Democrats will pick up some seats in the House, but I think the House will probably stay Republican. There was some talk that if president won by, for the Democrats to take the House, the president would really have to win on the range of 10 percentage points. And there was a chance at one point where maybe people thought that there's a person at this table who told me that when Governor Romney made his 47% comment, the election was over. I think we know that that's not quite true. But there are a number of seats where,
if he says it again, maybe it will be.
if he says it again, I suppose there's that possibility.
It's all about timing in this case.
But I think that the Democrats will pick up some seats. They have to pick up such a large number to retake control that I really find that hard to see. And of course, the Senate is not up for election, so that will remain in Republican hands. And of course, the governor will be just a Republican.
What about the Supreme Court? I think for the first time we're seeing a fairly hotly contested race there, aren't we?
We are seeing some interesting things. Governor Milliken today announced he was supporting Bridget McCormick, who's picked up a number of the big endorsements.
That's a big one.
It's curious to see what's going to happen to the Republicans. The Republicans are a little worried. That maybe the Democrats got the best Irish names and
they did. That's what I thought.
And put them up there. Which I don't know if anyone's done research on it, but it's the damnedest thing about Anglo-Irish on the God love Justice Zara, whether you agree with them or not. At least you have somebody who's not an Anglo-Irish. So Bridget McCormick, there's a very good chance that she could win. If one of the Republicans wins, such as Judge O'Brien, then the dynamics don't really change because, of course, Marilyn Kelly can't run for re-election. So we would still have that theoretically 4-3 Republican Democrats, presuming Justice Zara wins his seat. So it's turning into an interesting one. The Democrats are trying a slightly different strategy. I know that the candidates aren't all unanimously happy with the strategy the Democrats are doing, but of course they can't collude on how they do their ads and that sort of thing. And so we'll see. There's been very little polling at this point.
I wonder.
And
not much.
You're still dealing with, whenever you deal with Supreme Court candidates, you're dealing with whoever's going to win is don't know, and because people just don't know the names at this stage. So we'll see what happens with this. But I would not be terribly surprised to see Ms. McCormick win, see Justice Zara win. Markman might depend on the split. I mean, an O'Brien or a Kelly might win in that one. So
I went to the forum that they had at LCC and shot some video and put it up on YouTube because I thought it was interesting to see. I mean, we haven't seen that sort of aggressive campaigning on the part of Supreme Court candidates talking about their philosophy that openly. I thought they went further than most do in terms of criticizing the prevailing.
Well, the majority on the court is what they consider to be what they call a rule of law court, and this of course caused, and one of the things that's actually hurting them a little bit, the Republican nominees, is the fact that they put all these things on the ballot. They put Proposal 2 on the ballot. They put the emergency manager thing on the ballot, and they're very upset about it. And as Justice Young told me in an interview, he said, "This is what a rule of law judge means. It means sometimes you win, and sometimes you lose. Sometimes you're going to like what we do, and sometimes you're not going to like what we do." Mm-hmm. And okay, from that standpoint, I suppose there's validity, but that actually did hurt a little bit in terms of some of the early fundraising and some of the early endorsements, because some of the Republicans were really very, very unhappy with that decision, which is fairly clear at the Republican convention when there was some talk about, do we try to run someone else for one of these nominations? So that race could be very interesting in terms of, and of course, there's a couple of other factors. I mean, here you have the whole West Wing doing an online ad for Ms. McCormick, because her sister, of course, was on the show.
It was so stunning to see the entire cast there.
Yeah, I mean,
she's just a real interesting person in general. Locally, she's married to Steve Crowley, who is from DeWitt, grew up here, and is an advisor to Obama now. Like I say, her sister's Mary McCormick, who's actress. They're really interesting. Also, she started a Innocence Project at U of M, and it's the only Innocence Project that's not DNA based. It's going for to prove people innocent beyond the DNA stuff.
It focuses more on bad lawyers,
Yeah.
and so it's had some success, and of course that's one of the things that they've been that the critics of her have been pointing out, is that she's been defending convicted murderers, and the argument being, well, maybe they were wrongly convicted. So
Right.
That's what makes her a very interesting character. And of course, she's her sister Mary McCormick is good friends with Chelsea Handler, and they were both on the Chelsea Handler show, and you could tell she was getting a little nervous because there was a lot of discussion, anatomical discussion going on.
Oh, yes, there is at Chelsea all the time. Yeah, I just think
that may bring you a group of voters that don't normally show up.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, I just think that Bridget McCormick is a real interesting candidate. On the other hand, radio and TV that I hear, just overwhelmingly Three Republicans, just constantly. I've heard one ad so far for the Democrats. I've heard the ad for the Three Republicans constantly. I haven't seen that West Wing ad you're talking about. So
that's YouTube only.
It's an online only ad, and the Democrats have been putting TV ads up for them. There hasn't been a lot of radio. One of the things the Republicans are doing, and one of the things that the American Justice Project, which is the Dan Perot group, has been doing, is they've been tying this controversy over Justice Hathaway to the Democrats and saying, they need to renounce her, and they haven't done that yet, and they've been doing robocalls, and the Republicans have been doing robocalls on that, and there've been ads running on the Detroit market on that. So,
John, will we be setting a record this year for the amount of media spending, political spending here in the state? Mike was talking earlier about it seems like the airwaves are absolutely jammed now that that's all we're seeing, our political ads end to end.
I think there's a very good chance of that, especially because of the ballot proposals, because we have so many ballot proposals, and there's such an intensity of opposition and support for several of them.
Yeah.
So there's a very good chance that we will see a record on that, and then of course, somebody other than me is going to have to go through and track down what everyone spends on all the various campaigns. And if we do, it'll be interesting because we don't have a gubernatorial race. We don't have state senate.
Right.
We do, of course, have a U.S. Senate race.
That's pretty much over, though, it seems.
The polling just doesn't seem to. Former Representative Hoekstra is
way down.
Might as well go out and throw a big party and have everyone for lunch. So what would really drive that, if in fact we do see that, is the spending on the ballot proposals.
Yeah, and if I was radio or TV station, first of all, I'd get real excited every 2 years and every 4 years, thinking I'm going to make a lot of money from this, and then I get really disappointed because there's been past years where the stations got a lot of presidential money. They've just gotten very, very little. There's been very few local spending on the presidential race. Beyond that, because Stebbins on Hoekstra hasn't been close, there hasn't been much spending on that. And there's not as many as those golden cow congressional ones. Remember 2 years ago, the golden cow one where it was going back and forth. It was a district near Lansing.
Wahlberg?
It was Wahlberg and the other. Oh, there was a fortune spent on that. There just aren't any of those now. So ordinarily, if I was a station, I'd be very disappointed. But like you said, John, the saving grace this year is those ballot proposals. My God, where did those people get this money from? How much money does that bridge man make every year to spend all that money to have all those ads saying, don't build another bridge, I want to be the only bridge? He spent a fortune on that so far.
Well, he has spent a fortune. Of course, the irony about that is that there's absolute agreement that there needs to be a second bridge. The question comes down to who's going to build it, where's it going to be, and who's going to control it. And in terms of the presidential, there is a chance still that we will see. We've started to see a little bit. We saw Representative Ryan in last week. We saw Ann Romney in. The Republicans, off the record, will tell you that Michigan is sort of seen as a second-tier battleground state. That if it looks to them like maybe they can't win in Ohio, they're going to put a major effort into Michigan yet. And the Democrats know that too, and so I would not be surprised to see some TV ad spending on that regard. Now, most of the ad spending that's been on presidential has been by the super PACs, and
they pay a premium for that.
They do pay a premium. See, that's the thing. If you're a candidate, you get low rate.
Right, you get the discount.
You get the discounted rate, and so one of the reasons why the super PACs have been coming in and spending primarily on Governor Romney is so that he could bank his money and put it into the other battleground states. The president hasn't had to do that at this point, and of course they would like it if nothing else if they could get a closer race here and force the Obama campaign to start spending some money in this state, then they would view that as a plus for their other states because that would be diverting funds, obviously. So.
This is LCC. This is LCC Radio, WLNZ 89.7 here in Lansing, Michigan. Mike?
I was just going to say, but the spending on the ballot proposals just been outrageous. Both the bridge one and the one that's constantly against the collective bargaining issue and so forth. There's been about 3 of those. I can't believe, A, the amount of money that's being spent, and B, the disproportion between the two. In other words, a huge number of don't build the bridge and only a very, very rarely do build the bridge.
Well, that's why Governor Snyder was on radio getting free media time when he can because he doesn't have the deep pockets to be able to go up against those kinds of events.
Yeah, it seems like the wrong way to really run a democracy is to say, have a bunch of ballot proposals and see who can spend the most on ballot proposals.
One of the other concerns about having so many ballot proposals this year is this reading through them takes time. And if people wait until they get to the polling place to try to make up their mind on some of these ballot proposals, it seems to me that's going to slow down voting like crazy. We don't have some of the early voting that Ohio, our sister state Ohio, they've already made up their mind down there. They've got a significant amount of their vote in. I mean, it just seems to me we could have extraordinarily long lines this time.
It could have a big impact, and sometimes when you see that, you see people just fill out one part of the ballot and say, "That's it, I'm done," and walk away. Which, of course, it could go either way. Usually, if that happens, it tends to go against the side that wants something, because mostly the people that show up and are committed to voting are going to vote no, and so we'll see what happens with that. But yeah,
no is a yes vote in one instance.
And there's a theory about a burnout factor too, that if people get deeper and deeper into a ballot that's too long, they start to vote crankily. In other words, villages don't like to be in a long ballot because they start to vote against villages if there's too many of them and they're too late in the ballot. And I think in general they tend to become more negative as it gets further in the ballot. If they tire out, and also that's when you tire out that you start to just go on name recognition for the obscure candidates. You don't sit there and look through anything. You just vote, I know who George Perlis is and things like that.
There's also because we have a 100-word minimum or a maximum rather on the ballot issues. There is some indication that depending on this is why they spend so much time fighting about it, because depending on how it is worded, can have a big impact on how the public votes on it. I mean, you go back a few years ago to the affirmative action issue. There's some suggestion now that because it was worded in such a way that even people who thought they were voting against it actually voted for it, just because they said, well, I'm in favor of that. So and so we'll see what happens. That was one of the reasons why they came up with a compromise on Proposal 2, which neither side likes, but they had to come up with something. So they came up with a proposal, and they're going ahead with it now. It's former Governor Engler was in the state today and talked about how if Proposal 2 passes, he thinks Michigan will become an economic island that no one will want to visit, and that has become the linchpin into the opposition. And it's curious because you've got one set of opposition that wants no on everything except the Emergency Manager Act, and then you've got another group that wants yes on the Emergency Manager Act, no on the labor one, no on the energy one, no on the home health care one, and then yes on the tax one, and yes on the bridge one. Yeah. And who's going to have the winning strategy? Who knows? Well, we will know, obviously.
This time, though, I think the media has generally been doing a better job of explaining it. I've seen a lot of coverage on television. Local media, Free Press News, Lansing State Journal, MLive.
MLive's been holding a weekly webinar.
They're at least covering it more intensely. Yeah. They recognize it. They're very confused.
Well, and one of the things about the advertising is that people are now starting to pay attention to some of these things. I mean, I've had a number of folks who, folks at coffee shops, that sort of thing, who are not necessarily the kinds of people who would necessarily bring up a political conversation, but wanted to talk, for example, about Proposal 3, which is the one on alternative energy. And the thing they were concerned about was putting it in the Constitution. They said, I think it's all great, but I just don't think it should go in the Constitution. And I didn't say anything because I could I could guarantee you a week's pay that neither one of them read the Constitution, at least the Michigan Constitution, and it's not easy to read. But I understand the point they're making, and that, of course, is the argument that the opponents are focusing on, and that the fact that two folks at the coffee shop brought that up, and these were the folks pouring the coffee, makes me think that, well, maybe there's going to be something here that's going to happen. So,
we saw something like that in Wisconsin, where even people who wanted Governor Walker out were unhappy about the idea of, using a referendum to do it. They don't like the idea. There are certain types of passing laws on the ballot proposal idea that make people uncomfortable.
Oh, you've had situations in this state where people say, I don't like this guy, but I don't think you should, unless you can show that he's committed actual malfeasance, misfeasance, then he got elected and he should be allowed to serve out his term.
One thing I'm really curious about is where's the energy in Michigan this election? Because, I saw so much energy. Bill and I we went there on April 15th years ago when they were just tax protesters then and tax party people, and they became the Tea Party eventually as they kept coming back to the Capitol. You could see real energy in that group. And I don't know if are they as energized in Michigan as they once were?
The Tea Party specifically?
Yeah,
or
the Tea Party wing of the Republican Party. Is it the Republicans who are really energized this time? The Democrats? Neither one?
You both are, but both are in different ways. I think the majority of people, frankly, are worn out, and they want a decision made, and they want to figure out, okay, make up your mind, let's get somebody elected, and let's see if we can't get something worked out. The partisans on both sides are very, very energized, and they're very, very determined on both sides. Now that's to a certain degree a narrower fragment than the overall majority. I think most people have made up their minds whether or not they like the president or they don't, whether or not they're going to vote for him, or whether they would vote for him, wouldn't vote for him. It always sounds dumb to say this, but I think we're now at a stage where this is very, very clearly a turnout election, where both sides are very, very focused on getting the turnout that they can. We are not seeing the Republicans make the same mistakes that they made in 2008 in terms of pulling out of states and or that say the Democrats made in 2004, doing the same thing, pulling out or not putting much effort into it. Both sides are putting a pretty intense effort in. Now you can argue who might be doing a better effort. I will tell you that I'm quite struck at how well organized Republicans have been this time compared to 2008. The Democrats have been fairly well organized. I think there was a bit of a time frame there that the Democrats were just sort of sitting back and saying, okay, we got this. And then after the debate, they suddenly woke up and said, maybe we don't got this, and started working a little harder. And it was interesting dynamics because leading up to that first debate, you were starting to see funding shifts.
Yes.
People were talking about nationally on both the Democratic and Republican side.
Yeah.
They were starting to shift more from contributing to their presidential candidate to their congressional candidates. On the Republican side, it was because they thought maybe Governor Romney would win. And on the Democratic side, they thought it was because President Obama couldn't lose. And now that's changed again. Now you're starting to see the money go back into presidential candidates. So there is energy both ways. It's not quite the same energy that you saw 2 years ago, or that you saw in 2008, or that you saw in 2006.
Yeah, I don't see either side as energized as those two times.
I also don't see the college-age students energized
no, they're
all.
not.
No, well, let's face facts. I think there was a sense in 2008 of being part of something historic,
Right.
And bringing the race question into the presidential election is difficult in many respects. But it's clearly there. It's clearly a factor. It's clearly a factor in 2008. It's a factor in 2012. And that was part of what was going on. And there was this sense of at the same time, you had massive economic turmoil underway that I think led a lot of people to say the Republicans have just lost it. We've got to try something different.
It seemed like George Bush was even quick to want to hand over the keys to somebody else.
Yeah, we've certainly had economic malaise in the last 4 years. It is slowly turning, but I think we're at a stage now where we're beyond whatever the public and private sector can do in and of themselves. I think we're now more into an area, and economists will talk about this, of getting human psychology to want to push things a certain way.
Mike, when we talk about human psychology as a media critic, one of the things that I always thought made a real difference, maybe added another 3 or 4 points to the swing where it went from Obama to Romney, was Chris Matthews' meltdown on MSNBC after the Obama debate. I saw him go absolutely ballistic years ago when Howard Dean, the Dean scream.
Mm-hmm.
If you go back and look at the Dean scream, there was nothing wrong with it. It was somehow one of those zeitgeist moments where it captured the public attention, and all of a sudden he became completely unacceptable as a candidate for maybe no good reason. But Chris Matthews sort of spearheaded that one as well. I mean, he seems to have an inordinate amount of power. He strikes me as this sort of super macho guy that's always worried about male competitiveness and who is on the right track. And he comes across, he's sort of an interesting character to watch, but he had this huge meltdown on MSNBC that night that really sort of cast the die, because all of a sudden you had the Democrats criticizing earlier.
Yeah, I don't think that was that much a factor just because of the low ratings of MSNBC.
Well, true, but
and
it was
because of the
repeated
fact that I never saw it, for instance. It was more the universality of it, that who's the Louisiana guy with the accent who talks funny and was married to Mary, what's her name?
James Carville.
James Carville sitting in the CNN thing, surrounded by Republicans and moderates and so forth, looked at it and finally said, "I'm sorry to say this, but I think there was only one guy who really wanted to be there tonight."
Yeah.
And it was that kind of a comment by James Carville that I think made a difference, because that was among a bunch of moderates, and he was the Democrat in the group, and he was saying he was sorely disappointed. So just in general, people were sorely disappointed in Obama. And like we're saying, you could lose the debate not by what you say, but by your attitude, energy, emotion.
It's sort of sad, though, isn't it, to see stylistics mattering so much? But then I remember the the famous Nixon-Kennedy debate.
Absolutely, from the very beginning.
Again, they said this time, if you listened to it on radio, you thought that Obama won, and if you saw it on TV, you were sure he lost.
Obama just by such little things as looking down all the time instead of looking there. Romney sitting there looking at it, and when Obama would make a very effective point, a sharp point, Romney would feign a smile as if it hadn't been hurt. In other words, don't let it look like it hurt. Like that, So Romney knew how to do all that stuff, and boy, let's see if Obama's learned how to do it by tomorrow night.
I watched that debate with my 130 of my 260 freshman students, mostly freshmen, with their eye clickers. Mm-hmm. And it was interesting because by the end, they really thought Romney was kind of getting over the top himself in that debate. But by then it was too late. I don't think it made any difference.
I agree. I think that by then, within the first 20 or 30 minutes, I think unless there was some catastrophic screw up on one side or the other, I think the public had more or less made up their mind.
Yeah.
And again, if you monitor social media, I don't know if anyone has done this from a scientific standpoint, but you can almost always tell how the public views things, because the guys who think their guy is winning are always posting first. They're always posting first and posting fast. And then the guys who were sort of stunned say, what's happened to my guy? Why is he doing this? About 15 minutes into it, all of a sudden, oh my God, I got to start saying something,
they're quiet for quite a while.
They'll grab a theme. Well, you saw that with the Romney-Obama debate. The Republicans were out there slamming, just going giddy. Then again, on Thursday, you saw it, but it was the exact opposite. The Democrats were all excited, and the Republicans just sort of sat back, and finally they started out, and almost to a person, the only thing they could seem to say was, well, Biden is rude. And that was their thrust. So, we sit there and we say it's too bad, politics is supposed to be based on logic and reason and all the rest, and there is some of that, obviously, but we can't escape the fact that politics is and always has been entertainment.
Yes.
And just like sports and just like soap operas, people sympathize, go for a candidate the same way they do for a character, the same way why did everyone love Barnabas Collins? He was a vampire, crying out loud, but they did.
But I have to now, it makes it more complicated, because I have to tune into the right cable stations, and I have to have the remote in one hand, switching among the different stations, which ones, I can only DVR 2 of them, so I have to move around and see what's going on. Then I have the tweet deck set up so that I can put in the right hashtags and watch what people are saying on Twitter. Then I have to use my laptop so that I can tweet. Right. So I have to be monitoring it on my phone and using it's getting to the point where next I'm going to have to get those, $10,000 Google glasses so I can read the feed, in real time.
It's funny. There was a movie that actually has nothing to do with politics. It was a rom-com. And I forget the name of it now, but Drew Barrymore was in it. At one point, she said, these days you can be if somebody can break up with you on 18 different mediums, and it's exhausting to try to keep up with them all. And there's a lot of truth to that. It's certainly changed from the time frame when there was basically only one or two different ways of getting news and following what was going on. And now, if you're a political reporter, you've got to try to cover all of these different aspects. And if you're a politician and a political campaign staff, you've got to do the same thing.
So, what do you think Obama's reaction was when he watched Saturday Night Live this week? You described him to a T, and so did Mike, about how he reacted. That's how they played it out on Saturday Night Live, looking down.
I think he's had a hard lesson now. As somebody pointed out to me, President Kerry beat President Bush in their first debate too. So,
right.
It's not unusual for an incumbent president to actually not come off very well the first time because, frankly, that they're not used to it. They've actually gone 4 years where, by and large, they don't go through a lot of one-on-one challenges because they are, after all, the president, and by and large, people don't challenge them on a one-to-one basis. So they got to get back into the game on that standpoint. So I would be very surprised if we don't see the president tune up his game tomorrow and in the next debate. And then we'll see what happens. Again, as I say, I think this is going to really come down to who is organized the best. I've said this. I did not think this would be possible, but I've said to several people, I would not be surprised to see Romney pull a Gore in this race. That is, him actually end up with a popular vote and lose.
Ooh, boy, that would be.
Well, it's interesting because for instance,
I have to say first that this is LCC Radio WLNZ 89.7 here in Lansing, Michigan, or the FCC under one administration or the other will come and get me.
Yeah, Huffington Post, for instance, publishes a electoral thing and a vote thing. And so even when they say it's like 47, 46, 48, 47, real close like that, they still have Obama with a fairly large lead in electoral votes. So it comes close, just what John's saying. It's very possible.
If we have a repeat of 2000, though,
yeah,
and this time the Democrat, and including the African American wins, that seems to me to lead more toward a refusal to accept the president as legitimate. Given the significant numbers that we see already of people who don't believe that he's actually a citizen, that he may be.
Well, I think you'll see some of that.
But we're just talking about the quirk of the fact of how you get more electoral votes, even though you have slightly fewer total votes.
Oh yeah.
And it just has to do with one guy has run away in some states, and a guy wins the close ones. But yeah, it is entirely possible at this time Romney would get 1% more, but Obama would still have.
I think Romney's definitely going to win the states of McCain. He's going to win them by a larger margin than McCain did. He's going to pick up some states that Obama won in 2008, for example, Indiana. And it could be very tight in some of the other states. And so I think mathematically it's possible that the governor will end up with a larger popular vote. But it's the electoral vote that governs, and in which case, I guess we'll see.
Know early?
Pardon me?
Will we know early? It should be a late night then.
We could. I don't know. I'm certainly not expecting an early night. I mean, not like 4 years ago. I'm expecting this to go into the evening. I don't think we'll see a situation like one of the problems with the 2000 election was, of course, what happened in Florida. I don't think we're going to see something like that. I don't think we're going to see a recount situation that would be so catastrophic like that. But
is Romney Bryan a weaker ticket than McCain Palin?
Oh no, I don't think so.
No,
not at all.
I mean, I've heard people say that Romney may be one of the worst candidates in a long time. That McCain was old, and I think that worked against him, especially visually. But I don't think he was unskilled in the same way that Romney seems so often unskilled.
No, I don't. I think McCain obviously had skills. I think Palin was not a good choice. Right. You can't get elected governor of anything without having something on the ball. And unfortunately, she didn't show that much in the campaign. No, I think Governor Romney is very focused. Is very interested in being president. I think obviously Paul Ryan, Representative Ryan, represents a very important part of the intellectual side of the right side of the Republican Party. You've had now completely different electoral dynamics than 4 years ago. I mean, it almost would not have mattered who the Democrats had as the nominee. 4 years ago, after, everyone talked about when AIG went down. Why'd you bail out AIG? Why'd you bail out Bear Stearns? We should let the market control. Okay, Lehman came along. We let the market control. Lehman went into crashed, and everyone went crazy.
Right.
And as I say, you could have run Bugs Bunny as the Democratic nominee, and I think he would have won under those circumstances. People were just reacting against Republicans. We have now had, as we said several times, 4 years of relative economic malaise, very slowly coming out of this situation. A lot of people still struggling, and people are tired, and people want to see resolution of something. And
Mike, when you look back on it, you saw in your, you've been watching TV for a long, long time as a critic. I mean, you come out of remembering the Walter Cronkite era in which Uncle Walter sort of set the tone every night for what it was that was happening politically. It's a totally different ballgame.
Yeah, it is. First of all, because there's just so many voices and so forth, and there are so many people who are only tied into the Fox News or the MSNBC and so forth, and the great moderate middle, which is what the networks were, just doesn't get as much. I mean, locally here in Lansing, CBS used to get a 20 rating, which is absolutely astonishing. 20% of all TV homes watched the CBS News every night. Now it's 9 or 10, so it's about half that. So that was the power of this tremendous middle-of-the-road voice of the CBS network, and the others were, and so forth. It's just not there anymore. So too many people are listening to extremes. When you talk about YouTube, you're watching YouTube of your choice. You're watching, your people on the YouTube. When you talk about the social media, when people choose Fox or MSNBC, you're just not getting those. There is no one in the middle to really moderate these issues for. So it's a shame.
One of the things I think, though, that is a close equivalence is saying that MSNBC is equivalent.
Oh no, I'm sorry. I'm just trying to.
I would just like to pontificate about that for a moment if I might, because the reality is that 3 hours in the morning is given to Joe Scarborough, who's a conservative, and I don't see Fox doing that.
There's no.
And we have Chris Matthews popping off as he did, and really a lot of the lefties there on the panel were very critical of the president's performance. You wouldn't have seen that on a Roger Ailes controlled Fox News. I don't think you would have seen their commentators being so.
No, but I think one of the points that Mike is getting at is that you have an awful lot of people now. I mean, I think people are getting engaged in the election and will be more engaged in the election. But you have an awful lot of people now that do not know what's going on, and they now have the option. Ignorance is profound in this culture, and they have the ability to just tune out. Exactly. I mean,
more than half the people here in our country don't believe in evolution. That news hasn't gotten to
in the old days. You picked up, even if all you wanted to read was the sports section, when you picked up the newspaper, you started to see the front page that said war declared. Now you can turn on your computer and go right to ESPN.com. Jeffrey Zaslow, the great columnist for the Wall Street Journal, died earlier this year during Hurricane Katrina. Wrote in a column about taking his daughter and a couple of her friends in movies, and he was talking about Katrina, and the other two girls in the car weren't sure what he was talking about. Weren't sure if he was talking about another girl in their school or, they had literally not heard anything about Hurricane Katrina.
Yeah. See, that's when a family, the era that Michael was talking about is when a family sat and watched the news together. Too.
Right.
Because it was around dinner time. Mm-hmm. And most people were home.
Here's a story about dinner time. There's a really good documentary coming out Thursday night on HBO called Ethel. It's very simple. Ethel Kennedy's daughter, Rory, making a documentary about her mother. It doesn't claim to be unbiased or anything else. But so Ethel Kennedy was talking to us this summer. She said that every Sunday they had a rule that Sunday at dinner, all 11 of the Kennedy kids had to discuss something that was going on in the news. And so that's how they all developed, because and that's how they each became kind of knowledgeable. They each know something about the news. But she admitted
with that many kids, they learn a lot.
That's right.
And Amy talks a long time.
Yeah. And have backup subjects too, because Teddy had what I wanted.
And she admitted that what probably happened was a couple minutes before dinner time, all the kids raced out to scramble to get the paper to find out what to talk about. Okay, you put that rule in today, and what if you don't have a newspaper at home? Okay, now all of a sudden they're going around the computer trying to figure out what's news.
I think it would be a richer experience.
Yeah. So the point is that we used to have families talk about things like this over the dinner table all the time. listen to Anderson Cooper talk about growing up with Gloria Vanderbilt and his mother, with all those politicians and artists and so forth, just talking about everything in the world every night before dinner.
Don't you think, though, that was what the elites did? And was
Oh,
that
sure.
really replicated?
No, it wasn't. Yeah, but I'm saying that we could replicate it if we wanted to. But it's just
sure.
going to be a lot harder.
But people don't even get together for dinner. I don't think
we're
they
going to get to that now.
Yeah.
There's 2 practices of soccer, football.
Well, I think each family could. I mean, in my family, my used to drive us crazy because we had to do homework for school. We had to do homework for Dad because he read a book called How to Double Your Child's Grades in School, and we had to do book reports, and we had to do reports, and we had to sit around on a Sunday and talk. And it used to drive us crazy. And he'd give us lists of words that we had to define and use in a sentence and things like that. And until one day we all revolted, and he said, "I thought you liked doing this." No.
Well, in our family, my parents had an interesting rule. You couldn't bring any homework home. If you weren't smart enough to get it done in school in your lunch hour, you weren't smart enough.
I like those.
And you shouldn't go. And you shouldn't go to college.
Where do I get those
That was their
parents?
attitude. So it was a challenge. I must admit, I was reading books in the hallway and writing papers over lunch. And
But anyway, talk about the great moderate voices, and that's what we realized that in the old days when an issue came up, you'd run over and get the newspaper. You get a lot of moderate thoughts about what it was. You'd turn on CBS, ABC, NBC. You'd get middle of the road views. If you don't get a newspaper, if you don't watch the network news, then you're sitting there grabbed by all these little things on the side. You'd be grabbed by Fox News. You'd be grabbed by something else. I'll quit saying Fox News and MSNBC, and I'll say the Daily Show. Okay, I love the Daily Show.
Me too.
But you're getting your news from Fox News or the Daily Show. You're getting it from something you saw on YouTube and so forth, and you just don't get that great wave of just middle of the road. Here's the information.
But that's the presumption that truth lies in the middle. Which, if you listen to Paul Krugman talk, for example, he said too many of our problems right now in reality are a chasm, and you can't bridge a chasm in 2 jumps.
Yeah, but
one side has to win. There are too many. We're going to either go off the fiscal cliff at the end of this year, or we are not. There isn't going to be some sort of really halfway
Well, but I think
point.
the point that Mike is making, and you can use the old variety shows where they used to show jazz and opera and rock and roll and all the rest. I mean, there was sort of this understanding that you were supposed to know about this stuff. One of the things that the moderate voices brought in was that they bring in other voices to talk about an issue. You were sort of guaranteed hearing the various sides, at least a little bit of the various sides. And so you could maybe more properly form an opinion because you had a greater variety of facts and opinions to draw from. Whereas when you view or listen to only one side, you're going to be inundated with just that one side, and you're almost going to end up, it's sort of like being a prisoner of war. It doesn't matter what side it is, you're going to end up believing that side.
Brainwash. That brings back.
Oh, yeah, it does.
And the chasms weren't being ignored. Because let's remember, you watched this moderate wave of things from CBS, and all of a sudden it was on CBS that you saw the civil rights riots and so forth, and you realized, wait, the civil rights protesters have a point. It was on CBS that you saw Edward R. Murrow do his thing about the migrant workers and that harvest of shame. It was on CBS.
Social problems like that, though, are the kinds of problems, Mike, that take a long time to solve. The challenge for things like global warming and economic collapse is that, as everybody says, they start gradually, but then they reach a point where the collapse is very quick. And we're going to need fast action on some of these, I think. I mean, just as we did with the economic collapse. We had to do something. We reached a point where we had to do something. And maybe they did the wrong thing, but they certainly had to take some sort of action to try to stabilize the markets. It's letting it get to the crisis point that worries me.
It'd be interesting to see if someone would put a documentary together how the Cuban Missile Crisis was coming.
Oh, at the time.
Oh, incidentally, there's some really, really good
starts
stuff.
This week.
Yeah.
In
the next week or so, I want you to watch a couple of documentaries on it. There's some really good ones. One of the best ones is on PBS, and what it is it's about the single Russian who prevented nuclear war. Now, if you've seen either Last Resort, the current TV show, or Crimson Tide, the movie, there's a very similar situation we never knew about on the Russian side. They had 2 sub-commanders, and if both of them agreed, they were allowed to push the button and shoot a missile. And if they did, of course, we were ready to absolutely bombard the missiles onto Russia at the same time. One said yes, and one said no. One refused to put his key in, and that's as close as we came to them firing a missile. And this is a tremendous documentary, and his widow talks about it.
When is this?
It's next week sometime.
Next week
I can't
sometime?
tell you exactly what time it is, but it was a really good one. That one's coming up. There's some other Cuban Missile things. Next week, watch these specials on the Cuban Missile Crisis.
Thank you so much to Mike Hughes, talking about television, and John Lindstrom of Gongwer, talking about, it's such an important political era right now. We're going to see some dramatic things here. Thank you very much for listening to Lansing Online News Radio. We'll be back next Monday night. This is LCC Radio, WLNZ 89.7. here in Lansing, Michigan. Thank you for listening.
That was a problem because we didn't know what time it was. So all of a sudden,
we can't. You guys can't see the clock behind it.
Oh, yeah.
Great show.